Hi chickens, this video is going to be about my experiences at Stonehenge, and most importantly my experiences celebrating the summer solstice at Stonehenge, which, as many of you will already know, is completely free access. You can touch the stones, you can dance in the middle of them and that kind of thing. One thing that I noticed after going to Stonehenge this year, which I didn't notice last year for the summer solstice event, was that it's kind of a hot topic this year amongst the online pagan community, on YouTube and elsewhere, groups, Facebook groups, that kind of thing. There's been a lot of attention paid to the state that the land was left in after the festival, discussions about how much longer we can potentially allow people to have access to the stones for, and that kind of stuff. And I felt like I should chime in on this because I've been to the summer solstice event at Stonehenge this year and last year. I've also attended for two of the winter solstice events, which are much smaller and are, I would argue, populated much more by pagans, although it's not exclusively a pagan thing. But because the UK gets so cold in the winter, you got to be hardy and you got to really want to be there. Whereas the summer solstice event, of course, is much more of a light-hearted solar atmosphere. It's warm, although it wasn't that warm during the night, let me tell you that. But I've got a herniated disc in my spine, so I tend to stiffen up. But yeah, so it's much more of a kind of unified party atmosphere, and more people go down there for more reasons, because more people can stand to be there all night and want to see the sun come out in the morning and stuff. It's more sociable. So let me start by talking a little bit about the history of the access at Stonehenge. I just want to get into that a little bit to begin with. I don't know how many people that have a concern about Stonehenge or are interested in the ins and outs of access at Stonehenge know about this, but Stonehenge actually had a free festival that took place on the land every June for quite a long time. I think it was between the years of 72 and 84, which is the year I was born. That will be right, because the Battle of the Beanfield happened in 85, but I'll get to that. So at Stonehenge in 1972, loads and loads of people gathered to have a festival at Stonehenge. People had been visiting obviously for years beforehand for various different reasons, pagans, New Age travellers, etc. But on this particular June, a great big festival occurred, and it was kind of in alignment with the Glastonbury Festival. A lot of the same bands kind of played, but they would go and play the Stonehenge venue for free. And so all of the land around it was populated by thousands of people who went there to be close to the stones, to trade with each other, to meet other people that were in their particular subculture, because it was a celebration of alternative culture at that time. There were lots of hippies there, lots of New Age people, lots of acid freaks, lots of people from all different walks of life that were kind of invested in a subculture of one kind or another. And this free festival would go on for sometimes several days. I believe sometimes, well, I saw some footage where it was purported to have gone on for like a week or so. And it basically all culminated in it being summer solstice. That was the end of the festival, that final day where everybody celebrated the longest day, and then they all kind of made their ways home. In 1984, this free festival had 65,000 people at it. It really had become quite a big thing, particularly since the government had attempted to close so many of the other free festivals down. And at that time in the UK, alternative subcultures of every stripe, but particularly political and spiritual ones, were a big thing. And the government were slowly kind of going around and kind of weeding out all of these places where alternative travellers, hippies would get together, and it was almost kind of a cat and mouse chase to get rid of some of these festivals that had been going for really quite a few years, and there was a strong tradition behind them and so on. And the government had shut quite a few of them down, and you can look this up, you can research the other festivals that were going on at that time. Windsor Free Festival was a big one, went on for quite a few years, right out the back of Windsor Castle, no problems whatsoever. And then they started sending police in and turfing everybody out, and some violence ensued, and it was basically the government's message: you can't do this, this is over, the party's over, that's it. You got to go and live in a house and behave like a normal person, get a job. All that kind of vibe came in. So the Stonehenge Free Festival was one of the last ones to actually be targeted by the government, and English Heritage allowed it to go on for quite some time. I believe in the late 70s there was some talk of restriction and some concerns by English heritage, and other things kind of happened. There may have been limited access some of the time, but as far as I'm aware, from 72 to 84 this went on, and you can look at some quite remarkable photographs and footage of these free festivals that took place at Stonehenge, and they really were sprawling and epic and kind of crazy to look at, I've got to say. In 1985, a court ruling was passed to stop any visitation to the site at any time for religious reasons. This court ruling came very late in 85, so much so that some of the travellers who were making their way to the festival weren't even aware that the court ruling had taken place. And this resulted in several hundred of them turning up, either because they didn't know that they had no access to Stonehenge, or they were protesting against being denied access from Stonehenge. Many of them were pagan. Many of them felt a spiritual pull to the site and made it there every year to meet up with other people and to experience the energy of the stones. So there was this convoy of vehicles that showed up at the Stones in June 1985, the arranged day. And obviously they weren't permitted access to the site. The convoy backed up, more and more cars and vans going down the streets. And basically out of nowhere, unbeknownst to these travellers and pagans who'd come to see the site, the police were ordered to put on a major offensive against these people. They were presumably instructed to go in hard and to send a message to these people that there was no access to Stonehenge and that they had to turn around. Of course they couldn't turn around because the convoy was so tightly packed. So basically what happened was, and you can see footage of this is not propaganda that I'm feeding you, there is footage of it all over the internet if you care to look. The police kind of made their way up the convoy in formation and started smashing out windows and trying to pull drivers out by their hair. Possessions were thrown around and that kind of thing. The travellers panicked, they didn't know what the hell was going on, so they decided that a few of them would break down a wooden gateway that led into the bean field at the back of Stonehenge, and they would try and escape from the police by driving as many vehicles as possible into this bean field to get away from the unprecedented police violence. So they did that. The police followed them into the bean field. More police came. Backup after backup was called. And it got to the point where there were vehicles driving around the bean field being chased by groups of policemen with truncheons and shields and whatnot. And again, if you look at the footage from Battle of the Beanfield, it's actually very shocking. In fact, there was a news reporter there who was attempting to report what he felt was the awful truth of what the police were doing to these people. And he actually got punched in the face by a police truncheon. You can see footage of journalists having police shields shoved over their cameras, being ordered to leave the field. Nobody was allowed to report on it. You can see footage of New Age travellers being dragged out of their vans, even when they have children in their arms. One man that's clearly had his head battered and is knocked out and is being taken away on a stretcher. You know, this really happened, and this was a very scary thing. The reason I mentioned the Battle of the Beanfield in the context of this video is because I really feel that Stonehenge has an undeniable pull for a great many different kinds of people with a great many different kinds of agenda. And it's very interesting because a lot of other sacred sites, old monuments, tombs, you know, old statuettes from times immemorial, objects, they've been placed into museums or they've had a velvet rope put around them. And nobody seems to be bothered by that. No, everybody's cool with that. Everybody's cool with standing back and observing, what history is given to us and having a look at it under glass, if you like. What's interesting for me is that Stonehenge isn't that way, and it never has been that way. People are very keen to get close. They are very keen to commune with the stones. So for me, I kind of see Stonehenge as more of a consistently and continuously living sacred site. It's not just something from the past, it's something that we are drawn to now in a very potent way, in an undeniable way. And I can't really explain fully why that is and why so many different subcultures are attracted to it. But I know that it's happening, and I know that it doesn't happen everywhere. It doesn't happen with every other thing. It's this site, and there's something about it which is mystical, magical, undeniably attractive. There's a pull, there's a draw, and a lot of people feel that it is in some sense their entitlement, and I don't mean that in a a way that would imply that they are dickheads. I just mean that they feel some sense of personal human attachment to the place, and they want to be close, particularly on those important days of the year, for various reasons. And actually what ended up happening was that it became such a majorly big thing that English heritage and the British courts were like, you know what, fuck this is crazy. And there was this court ruling, and then Battle of the Beanfield happened, which I feel was frankly a representation of what the establishment actually thought of these people, and in many ways their religious rites and practices. To treat people that way, it was utterly inhumane and terrifying for the people involved. Some of the women that were involved in Battle of the Beanfield still have nightmares now and are still fighting for justice now for what happened to them. So yeah, I mean, it is a very contentious issue. It is a very controversial issue. How many people is too many people? Is even one person being able to touch a Neolithic monument too many people? There are a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different ways of looking at it. I worry that if we shut down access, which I know is what some pagans certainly want, I worry that there may be repeats of this kind of violence, and I worry that people might feel disenfranchised, and I worry very much about neo-pagans, or I say pagans, pagans, druids particularly, who see it as a cathedral of sorts. I worry about how they will suffer ultimately. And I also worry about, as Egyptian kind of said to me on the YouTube Pagan Facebook group, I do worry as well about what will happen if alternative spirituality begins to grow. I mean, I did say to her in the context of that comment that I really feel that there was such a large gathering this year in 2014 because the sun was going to be so marvellous. I also feel to a lesser extent that the gathering was so large because the World Cup had kind of ended, like England were kind of out, and I felt like there was this ongoing desire for some kind of party vibe, some kind of unified vibe, which was something that I worried about, but I'm going off track. I do worry about the emergence of New Age spirituality. On the one hand, I love it, but on the other hand, I know a lot about the history of free access at Stonehenge. I've done a lot of research into it, and it did end in a very bloody and unnecessary way, and that scares me too. But there is something about that site, and it can't be denied. It really can't be denied, and there's something about it for me, obviously, or I wouldn't visit. So there was no access for 15 years after Battle of the Beanfield, and then eventually in 2000 limited access was negotiated, and English Heritage agreed to let people back in. This was partly as the result of some human rights legislation which stated that it was actually not cool to stop people from visiting a site of serious religious significance on a serious holy day in their calendar. It was a big victory for Wiccans, Pagans, Druids, etc. But it also enabled other people to be able to visit too, and that has expanded over time. The interest never went away, and admittedly, you know, it's interesting. It's there's something magnetic about it. What I would say is the love lives on with Stonehenge, and really I feel that I understand that it's a very important part of our history. I totally get that, but I also feel, and maybe this is a slightly hedonistic perspective, but I also feel that we are making history in the present, and that our earthly life and our earthly experience is no less important than the earthly experience of those who lived before. If the monument is living, and by living I mean if it's still central to our culture, central to our way of perceiving ourselves, central to our way of getting in touch with something about us, which seems integral to our humanity, then should it be placed under glass? Should it always be behind a velvet rope? I mean, it's living, it's not dead. People still want to go there, they still want to attend, it's still a thing. So if it's still a thing, is it actually a piece of history per se? Is it something that we can just write off and say, hey, this is this thing from the past, don't go in there? It's not a thing from the past. I've visited several times and it's very current, for all kinds of reasons, for all kinds of different people, and I feel like we are making history too. We make history each time we go. In fact, the history of Stonehenge is built up by us as we continue to venerate it and as we continue to be attracted to it. But yeah, you know, it's a very double-edged sword. And I feel that my experiences at Stonehenge have taught me that there is something very potent about the energy there. It certainly is possible to have a vast spiritual experience there, although not among the most significantly spiritual that I have had, but close. There's something transpersonal about it. And the stones to me feel alive, they feel awake, they feel fatherly. I feel a sense of... it's indescribable what I feel, actually. It's actually indescribable. It's something different to any other sacred site that I visited. What I would say is it's very difficult not to get territorial over the stones, and I think part of the reason that I feel like that as a UK pagan is because there aren't that many times during the year where vast amounts of pagans get together, and there aren't obviously places for us to go to exact our worship and practices as a group. You know, we have pagan groups, we have pagan moots and covens, but Stonehenge is really the cultural central spoke for paganism, and all pagans have some kind of vested interest in the stones one way or another, and that's as it should be, I think. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody has that pull, that draw, even if they've never been. Even just the silhouette of them in an image, in a photograph, just it makes you feel something, it makes people feel something. And it's difficult not to get territorial when there are people having access to the stones during these times of great spiritual significance for me, who obviously don't respect what is at stake if we lose access to Stonehenge, and also don't respect the nature of the stones and the nature of how we feel about the energy of that place and the energy of unification as pagans. That is a pain in the arse for me. I'm going to be completely honest, it's a pain in the arse for me. There has been a big kind of focus placed this year by pagans in the online community, certainly, about the litter that is left after the Stonehenge event ends and people leave. I have mixed views on this. Obviously I am very against littering anywhere. It's not my bag, baby. And as a pagan, that's kind of like damn straight. I don't litter at Stonehenge, of course, and I'm not condoning litter. However, the Summer Solstice Stonehenge event normally peaks at between 25,000 and 35,000 people. You know, that's a small festival in anyone's estimation. There is going to be a certain amount of litter. Not everybody is there with the same agenda, not everybody there is pagan. I think that's a mistake that some people have been making in thinking that these people dropping this stuff are pagans and pagans are leaving this thing in this state, and don't they understand, you know, the sacred nature of the site. No, we are not the majority. Let me just put that out there right now. There are a great number of people who come to Stonehenge for the Summer Solstice event. You have got pagans of every single stripe. You have ravers. You have every kind of raver, you know, new age ravers, psychedelic ravers, drug taking Saturday party line ravers. You have tourists of every distinction. There are many tourists that I've met at Stonehenge who said that they actually intentionally planned their trip to the UK to coincide with the Summer Solstice celebration because they wanted to see it so much. You meet Muslims, you meet Sikhs, you've got the Hare Krishna movement there, you've got all forms of media, you've got independent photographers, photographers from magazines and newspapers, you have radio reporters doing interviews with people. There are academics there, there are historians, there are sociologists, there are people that are just interested in, you know, seeing the way people interact with each other, anthropologists, that kind of thing. You've got old people, young people, people with their kids. You know, you see kids on people's shoulders. It's very, very diverse. And when you have such a large public gathering with that many different kinds of people involved, there's going to be mess afterwards. But as much as it's unattractive, and I didn't see it this year actually because I left half an hour before the end and there were certainly still a very large amount of people there. From what I saw from the side that I left at, it was really very minimal, but I have seen some images that tell a different story, and I do appreciate that. But English Heritage have this firmly under control. They've been doing this for a very long time, and it was they themselves who allowed that renegotiated access in tandem with these human rights laws that came in. You know, they all had to sit round a table and agree to what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate. So they're in control. They have litter pickers and people tidying up during the event. I saw that several times. And they have litter pickers clearing up every inch of that land after everybody has left. during the time that the stones are open access to the public, there are tons of security guards. And the great thing about it is that there are police too, but the police do not enter into the centre of the stones. They hang back and they just walk around the perimeter. Whereas the security guards, which are hired by English Heritage, they are more friendly, more forthcoming. They're in the middle of the stones. They're making sure nobody is doing anything they shouldn't be with the stones or with each other. They're trying to keep the atmosphere nice. And they're great. And then the police, obviously, you've got that kind of formidable Battle of the Beanfield flashback situation for a lot of the older New Age travellers who are there. They are still there. They still come every year. So the police kind of hang back, but they're there if needs must. There were some arrests made, mostly drug related. And I have my own opinions on that too. Drugs are shamanic, entheogens are shamanic. I was stone cold sober as a judge, but I understand people have different ways of reaching divinity. I have no judgment. You know, most of the arrests were drug related. That to me is not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean anyone was being violent. It doesn't mean anybody was being inappropriate. It literally means drugs were found on somebody. You know, that's what it means to me. So in that sense, I think really for a 37,000 strong public gathering, which is what it was this year apparently, a few drug-related offences and some litter, which is going to be cleaned up, is actually kind of a small price to pay for pagans to be able to visit there twice a year. Whether or not this is going to continue as it snowballs, I'm not really sure if it's snowballing, but it was huge this year, larger than last year by about 10,000 people, I would say, just from my guesstimation. Whether or not this is going to be permitted to continue, or whether or not we're going to see the same issues that we saw last time, which I don't think will be as amplified this time. Like, I don't think it's going to be able to go on for days and weeks. I don't think people are going to be campaigning for that, but certainly there's a big argument to state that the diversity and the different groups of people that are interested in the site is actually growing larger. I think it's important, even though it's okay, I understand, for people to talk about the litter that is left after the Stonehenge gathering. I get that it is a bone of contention with pagans. I do understand that. It's a bone of contention for me. I don't see why anyone should litter anywhere at any time. It doesn't make sense to me. However, I think it's very important that people understand that if we overtly choose to amplify that aspect of the situation, I think it gives a lot of people that want excuses to get bureaucracy involved and stop pagans from visiting again a lot of ammunition. And I think sometimes we have to think about the responsibility that we have to each other to not amplify those particular aspects of the Stonehenge experience. A lot of people have written a lot of things on the internet that I don't think they realise how potentially hurtful they are to pagans like me, who go there with no bad intention, who don't drop any litter, who touch the stones even just a minimal amount. I touched one stone once the entire time I was there. It's really important to me, for my earthly experience in my life now, that I'm able to do that. I think that is exciting. I think that is raw and mystical and so transpersonal. I don't want a velvet rope around the stones. I want that little bit of access. So even though I understand it's shocking for people to see that litter has been left, and I understand the temptation to get on the pagan high horse, it's also dangerous in a way, because there are people who would have it revert back to zero access, and sometimes I wonder if that's better or worse than what is happening right now. So with that said, I would say I met a lot of people both years at Stonehenge Summer Solstice who were not pagan, but who have a huge interest in paganism, very respectful of the stones, really enjoyed the experience, found the sunrise absolutely magical, the joy and the unification, the friendliness, the sense of belonging, the sense of majesty and spiritual union with each other. All of that is available and very special, and to meet other pagans there and to just get that sense of joy and to start conversations, it's lovely, it's great. The drum circles, the energy raising, the whole bit, seeing people do rituals, seeing people do candle magic, it's a magical time in the year for me. I don't know whether or not I will go many more years in a row, I'm not sure, but we already plan to go next year, I know, me and a few of my friends. So having said that, there are certain things that make pagans very nervous about non-pagans visiting the stones, and I can understand that too. First of all, the litter is clearly not obviously mostly or even at all perpetrated by pagans. I mean, that's a no-brainer. The litter is left by people who go there for more of a party atmosphere, for the experience, for the novelty value of it, that kind of thing. And I think pagans get very edgy about any ammunition that could be used against us having some access to the site. So that is a worry. Some people go there with the wrong attitude. I'm not going to lie, there are situations that I have seen and been privy to in some sense that have been disappointing. For example, two extremely drunken men deciding to chant England chants while the sun was coming up, and then demanding to know why everybody was so bothered about the sunrise anyway, because it happens every morning. That really lowered my vibrational frequency, but I just moved away. Most people were hugely astounded by the spectacle and enjoying it, but you will always get idiots. You will always get people who don't go there with the right attitude, don't understand what's going on, don't want to understand what's going on. The occasional argument you walk past. Although, having said that, let me just say, this year at Stonehenge there was a super sacral chakra energy happening. My god, couples were just grasping each other and full on making out, like the love, just running their fingers through each other's hair, and it was like, my friend and I both noticed it in a major way. Like, the kissing that was happening between couples was crazy. Like, just absorbing that energy, it was so sacral this year. I didn't go with Danny, so there was none of that awkwardness, but we would definitely acknowledge it and then not let it overcome us anyway. We'd be way too interested in watching the skyline and stuff. But yeah, super sacral energy. But yeah, a couple of arguments took place. Again, for me, that's not in alignment with what Stonehenge is all about. It's not cool. But really, these are incidents that are quite minimal. I didn't allow them to distract from the overall truth, which was that there were loads of people communing together to share in something special and to have a human experience. And that was magic. So you have to kind of balance it out, but I think a lot of pagans get very edgy about that aspect of things, and I do get very edgy about that aspect of things, definitely, from a respect point of view, but also from an access point of view. I think that we need to respect the great privilege that it is to actually be able to access those stones. That's actually amazing. That's not to be taken for granted. That's serious shit. And for 15 years, we were not allowed to do it at all, any time of the year. So I think it's really important that non-pagans understand that to come into a situation like that and to act like a prick is actually directly, possibly affecting our ability to visit the stones in years to come. And that kind of freaks me out a little bit. There was one guy who actually managed to climb on top of one of the arches of the stones. Now, this is something I've never seen before. They're very difficult to access the top of, I'm quite sure. No idea how he did it, but he struggled to get down. Now this again is a major bone of contention for me, and you had some people that were really loving it and taking photographs of it, and other people, particularly pagans, just irate. Get off the stones, what the hell are you doing? Again, from a respect point of view, but of course also, if he falls down and breaks his neck or kills somebody else in the fall, bureaucracy comes along, court rules that it's gotten too out of hand, English heritage, you can't handle your shit, the stones are closed off again. So we're always thinking about this very real possibility. And so that frustrated me. Security dealt with it very well, by the way, really impressed with them. They totally surrounded that part of the monument. They made sure that everybody kept at a reasonably safe distance without actually evacuating the stones completely, which would have been impossible to do because there was a huge drum circle. It was the middle of the night and everybody was dancing and lighting incense and things, so it would have been impractical to move everybody away completely. But they did the best that they could do under the circumstances. But again, this is a situation where I feel like that's where it gets volatile for people. And so then you begin to ask yourself over time, should this be a pagan card holders thing? I know some people have mentioned maybe having a draw, you know, like a lottery draw kind of thing. And sometimes I just think, God, I wish they could just scan some microchip in my arm and realise that I am a true pagan and then grant me access and then make sure that certain people that are just going to ruin it for everybody can be left out. But it's a public gathering, and in a way we have to question whether it's better everybody than nobody, because there is no pagan microchip. And also there are a lot of non-pagans who want to visit for other spiritual reasons. This is going back to what I was saying about being territorial. There are a lot of non-pagans who feel that it holds massive spiritual significance. There are a lot of old New Age travellers who feel that actually it holds massive political significance. And who am I to shut those people out if they are being respectful, and if they are not dropping litter, and if they are not doing anything that is going to be irresponsible, or that is going to be picked up and amplified by the press? Who am I to shut those people out? Who am I to be territorial? It's hard. It's a hard thing, and it's difficult for me to comment any more than that, because that is kind of my feeling on what's going on. We can't have pagan card holders. We can't have pagan card holder access. And I know some people would rather have no access than have some. But sometimes I think most of the people that say that are people that have never been. We are making history right now. Our spiritual quest, our sense of spiritual connection is just as important as our ancestors that came before, and before that, and before that. We're not divorced from that line. We're carrying it on. We are carrying it on into the present. Would you tell somebody that they shouldn't visit a 1,500-year-old cathedral because, you know, it's obviously really, really old and, you know, comes from the past, and we should just put a velvet rope around it and stop everybody going for Sunday service? You wouldn't say that. And to be fair, pagans are asking for a lot less than that. They're asking for 2 days a year. So, you know, that's my personal view, and I understand that there are going to be different ones. But a few people have asked me what my perspective is on this, and I thought that I would give it to you straight. So much love, blessed be.